Shalom, shalom, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Pulse of Israel here in our eternal and ancestral homeland, the land of Israel, in our beautiful, biblical, eternal, and indivisible capital, Jerusalem, since King David's time. And if you follow me, you know I'm very much a history buff. I tell everyone, especially the youth, learn history, biblical history, modern history, Jewish history, general history. Learn history. It is so important to know where we come from, and especially as Jews, our past to know where we are going. And today we're going to delve into a modern historical story to hear the backdrop of it for information that I don't even know about. And we're going to be talking to Mr. Leonard Grunstein, who is the author of a book called Because It's Just and Right: The Untold Back-Story of the United States Recognition of Jerusalem as the Capital of Israel and Moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. So welcome, welcome, Leonard. Shalom Aleichem, and thanks for coming on the Pulse of Israel today.
Thank you. Thank you. Shalom Aleichem.
So what I didn't get to tell people is besides you writing this book, you are a retired banker and lawyer and have spent your life very much involved in charitable activities. So what made you write this book, Leonard?
Uh, it was the middle of COVID. I met my co-author, Farley Weiss, on the street. We had a street minyan davening Mincha Maariv, and we got to talking, and we saw that we shared a lot of common views. And he came out and he said, Len, I've got some papers I'd like to show you. Farley Weiss, who was president of the Young Israel National Council for many years, had grown up in Arizona, and he was involved with then Congressman John Kyle, who became Senator John Kyle, and he was the one who authored the Jerusalem Embassy Act of 1995.
Wow.
And I was looking through these papers and I couldn't get over it. And then there was one very
But what
striking,
what couldn't what couldn't you get over in these papers?
what a wonderful person Senator John Kyle is, and his important views on the subject of Yerushalayim. In fact, they asked him when he became senator, what's your priority for your first year in office? He goes, it's to get the Jerusalem Embassy Act passed. They go, what? That's your priority? Why is that important to you? And it's fascinating because he looks them straight in the eye and he says to them, well, it's because it's just and right. And they said, but John, you're not even Jewish. You don't have a big Jewish constituency in Arizona. Why is this so important? He goes, because it's just and right. So said to myself, if he could say it, I'm going to show why. And that began our collaboration and a lot of heavy research and writing, and that became the book.
Wow. So what is there to this backstory that is so interesting for people to want to buy this book and read it to find out all the more details?
There are so many things that happened at the time. It was not easy to pass such a law. Many people talked about it and spoke a good game, but the Clinton administration was very much against having this kind of a law passed. The State Department, which is beginning to change now under Marco Rubio, but reality is for many, many years, including during the Holocaust, they were anti-Semitic. There could be all kinds of explanations. I remember when I was in college, there was a former State Department staffer who was teaching political science. He took a liking to me because I was pretty good in math and I could write pretty well. And he asked me to do a position paper for him that he would present to the State Department on reopening the Suez Canal. So this was 1970. And he goes, is it important? Is it a vital interest for the United States to have the Suez Canal reopened? So I'm doing all these stats and reviewing all the collections they made of fees for passing through the canal. And I noticed a lot of patterns, including that the United States really didn't use it that much because by then they had super tankers that went around the south of Africa. So to the United States, it wasn't important for itself, but it was very important for its allies in Europe and NATO. And so I made the presentation. Now he's reviewing it. He comes back to me, goes, this is really good. I love your analysis because I really went in depth into the numbers. He goes, but I don't agree with the conclusion. Wouldn't it be better if Israel didn't exist? Now, I can't tell you he was anti-Semitic. There were professors I had that were anti-Semitic,
That was a
but that
serious question. Wouldn't it be better if Israel didn't exist?
right. And to him, he wasn't being anti-Semitic, even though he absolutely was. He just didn't know it because from his point of view, not only was it not a given, there was the Kool-Aid of the State Department that it was an annoyance because America wanted to have better relations with the oil-producing Arab states, and Israel was in the way. So wouldn't it be better if they didn't exist? Now, there's also another ethos in the State Department that's very problematical, and it goes back to what I believe is the original Byzantine conception of Christianity that they replaced us. They believed they were the chosen people. We were out and they were in. Notwithstanding that the Gospels don't say that, and especially the early Gospels say just the opposite. Be that as it may, that's the position that they were asserting. And that became a subliminal message to a lot of the, we don't have royalty in the United States, but we certainly have gentry. And a lot of the intellectual upper class people that inhabited the State Department had this view that they were better and that who are these upstarts in their mind that are impinging on their space. So there were all kinds of different reasons for it. But the reality is the Kool-Aid in the State Department was, wouldn't it be better if we didn't have this problem? They viewed it as opposed to the more modern view, which is the correct one factually, that Israel is one of America's best friends and allies in the world, and there's a partnership, which is very rare in foreign affairs.
Right.
Uh, and that partnership has sustained all these years because there's real mutual benefit. I call it in the book enlightened self-interest because in my experience in the business world, especially finance, and I represented, I'll tell you a cute story. One day, a group comes in of Saudi Arabian accountants and businessmen, and the son-in-law of the main guy in the group happens to be from Egypt. He was a medical doctor. And they come in and sit and they say, we heard you know how to do that kind of special lending where it's religious lending. Can you do Sharia lending? I said, of course. They look at me, really? Yes. So I asked them because I see the Egyptian son-in-law, are you El Alzar or the Saudis? I turned to them and I asked them, are they Malik? And they had brought their imam along, and he goes, what are you talking about? I said, never mind, bring your Qadi. The Qadi is their dayan. So they bring the Qadi to the next meeting.
The
He
judge,
goes,
for those who don't know the Hebrew.
oh, sorry, the judge. And he really knows something. So when I start talking this way, he goes, you know Malik? I said, of course I know Malik. He goes, wow, so how would you structure this? So Malik basically is in Iska Kula Pikadon, as opposed to Chatzi Malva, Chatzi Pikadon. So I pull out my forms, I start going over with him.
Leonard's
He goes,
going into different Jewish legal terminologies for lendings. Well,
right. So you can either style the financing as a fully non-recourse investment type of loan, or you could have half liability, half investment, where the party's not personally liable. Although many of the covenants in the document, especially a well-crafted document, are pretty strong, and there's a a tradition that we have of trust fund obligations. For example, if you send an agent to go buy wheat and they come back with barley, they bear the loss as opposed to the one who sent them. So it's a financing technique that's non-recourse unless you violate the loan covenants. And crafting the loan covenants so that they comply with law and halacha on the one hand or sharia on the other hand is very important. So he marveled at some of the clauses. He really enjoyed the meeting. The meeting was conducted in a combination of languages because the common languages were French and German. So it was very funny when people walked into the conference room, they heard all kinds of languages. And we got along really well. And so they hired me. And so consider this case. There's a Pakistani developer in New Jersey who's borrowing money. The first mortgage was by the Bank of China, which I happen to represent as well in other matters, and they waived conflict. And now a Saudi group that had in the forefront an Egyptian doctor, they were making the second mortgage financing on a Sharia compliant methodology that worked under US law and under their rules.
That's insane.
It worked. So I have some background there, but what it showed me is that when two parties that ostensibly, according to the world, should be at odds, get together and realize that it's in their self-interest to work together and each does better than they would otherwise, that's enlightened self-interest. That's a sustainable model. Because if it's merely just self-interest, that's not sustainable because that could end, which I believe is the secret to the Abraham Accords. Because business was always done.
Right.
Business finds a way. But now to validate it and to say it's good what you're doing and to reinforce it and now have the governments behind it, that created an atmosphere of enlightened self-interest. And I believe that's why it's sustained itself and will hopefully grow.
And how would you say that importance is connected to the development of the U.S. law to move the embassy to Jerusalem, which,
Uh,
even though passed in 1995, was not implemented until President Trump, 30 years later?
okay, so there's a little history. First, let's go back to that origin. It was not easy at first to get it passed. John Kyle wanted to get it done, so he met
Sorry,
with
20
Dole.
years later. 20 years later. My correction.
Okay.
Yeah.
He met with Dole and he got him on board. And Dole got a bunch of the other people in Congress on board. Um, the hardest part was to make it veto proof because the Clinton administration was
Mhm.
against it. They didn't want to be bound by this kind of a law. And it's interesting, it was Dan Shapiro, of all people, who drafted, because he was then the foreign policy advisor to Dianne Feinstein, the clause that sold the law, which was the waiver clause, which probably, interestingly, they meant it to kill the effectiveness of the law. It probably saved the law when the Supreme Court looked at the Zivotofsky case, which involved Zivotofsky, who was born in Jerusalem, who wanted the passport to say Israel, and they didn't want to do it. And that could have been the death knell to this law, but for the waiver provision, which saved it. And so the very thing that they hoped would kill the law probably saved it until finally Trump did the deed and recognized Jerusalem. Interestingly, he first recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and then after that moved the embassy, which is what David Friedman advised him. Uh, to me, as I did the research, it was uncanny how Trump getting approval and getting making the decision to go forward was similar to Truman and the original recognition of Israel,
How so?
because it was the same issue. The people against it were against it because they didn't want Israel to be recognized and they didn't want Jerusalem to be recognized. And they used the same arguments, which on their face seem to be very sensitive arguments. We don't want to have a war, we don't have this, that, all that proved out to be not the case. So Truman had in the room Clark Clifford, and he told Clifford, "You're going to have a lot of opposition. I want you to carry the ball here. I want you to make the arguments. I'm the president. I can't make the arguments. You make the arguments why it's important." And we both agree we want to get recognition of Israel done because it's in our interest to do what's right. Okay, Marshall comes in with his team. He's against it. Whatever it is, he's against it. They have all kinds of crazy things they talk about. There are a lot of Jews from the Soviet Union. They're commies. It could become a bastion for the Soviet Union, all of which was incorrect and not only untrue. Israel became a bastion of projection of power of the United States in the Western world as against the Soviet Union. But at the time, that was the specter that they were raising. And they argued it's domestic. You're just trying to win the presidency. You're not doing it for the right reasons. Clifford, absolutely, he was the domestic advisor. He said, "Are you out of your mind? I reject it. That's not the reason why. The president's doing it because it's right. And that's what we want to do." Okay. Now go forward to Friedman, the same kind of a conversation. The funniest part is one of the issues raised in the recognition was we got to wait for the UN, Jerusalem, they want to make it an international city, all kinds of baloney. By the way, that in reality, the plan was quickly dropped at the UN because everyone realized not Jordan wanted it, not Israel wanted it, and it was going to take to create what amounts to a Western colony like the Crusaders in Jerusalem. By the way, not just Jerusalem, under their map, it included Bethlehem, it included a whole bunch of area. No one was going to buy it. It was going to take troops and police, and no one wanted it, and no one was going to write the check. So it basically died a slow death over a few years. By the mid-50s, it was totally off everyone's mind. So now just imagine the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, comes in with a big fat briefing book, a loose leaf binder,
Yeah.
spreads it out. Trump says, "What do you got to say?" And he starts saying, "Well, in 1995, when Israel conquered Jerusalem." And so David Friedman turns to him and says, "I think you got your dates wrong. It was 1967 when Israel liberated Jerusalem." Oh, slams his book, got nothing more to say. Okay. I told David when I met with him, I said, he said one more thing according to your book. He starts to talk about internationalization of Jerusalem as if that was still an idea. And
Who
that
was
how
saying that? Tillerson?
Tillerson, yes, because it was in his briefing book. So there were a lot of Kool-Aid type ideas in that book, which were not real. Meanwhile, whether it was Farley or people in the room, Jason Dove Greenblatt talks about how he got calls, everyone got calls, including President Trump, that this was going to blow up and the whole Middle East would go to war. And Trump was really cool. He would say, "I already made that decision."
No way.
Yes, it was fabulous. Okay, so when I sat with David, he said something really in a really great insight into Yeshayahu, because he said we always focus on v'chitatu charvatam li'itim. They'll turn their swords into plowshares. He goes, but you look a few psukim back at the beginning of the chapter, Yeshayahu says, "And peace will emanate from Yerushalayim." He goes, the recognition of Yerushalayim by the United States is what allowed, in fact, incentivized people to do the Abraham Accords. And I truly believe that because I think all this honest broker baloney which what does that mean even? In fact, by the way, in business, I don't know what an honest broker means. I know what a broker who represents one of the sides, a representative, means because you know you're dealing with somebody who's faithful to the other side and is doing an important piece of work. Whereas if a guy walks around saying, oh, he's unbiased and he doesn't take sides, it's like, what function do you do here? So America's being loyal to Israel, I believe, was the tangible evidence that being a partner with America, being an ally and friend of America, made a difference, was confirmed. Because until then, they had the impression of America that it was flighty. It would be this guy's friend because it suited their purpose, this guy's friend, because no one believes the honest broker nonsense. Everyone knows everyone has a bias called self-interest.
Right.
So now, when America demonstrated that loyalty to America meant something tangible, everyone said, I want to get on board with that relationship because then I know I have a real friend, not one of these flighty guys who's here today, gone tomorrow. And I believe that's in part what enabled the Abraham Accords to occur because they mattered. Having a relationship in that nexus, uh, in fact, it's the difference between centrifugal forces and centripetal. When you have a strong nucleus, it attracts people into the circle. When you don't, it pushes people away. And I believe that firmness is what enabled us. Now, there are a lot of other pieces that are hardly known. For example, the role of Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis, as a congressman at the time, this was before he was governor of Florida, had a hearing. And this was as a follow-up to his own personal visit to Israel, scouting out locations for
So,
the.
Leonard, I was on that trip hosting Congressman DeSantis in scouting out those locations. I have pictures of him
Wow.
at some of those locations.
Wow.
And then at the press conference he gave at the King David later that night after he saw those various locations. Yeah.
Amazing. Whoa. So now we close the circle here. This is fabulous. So then in November, he held hearings. And he was a great cross-examiner because he had the State Department rep there, and he kept hitting him back again and again with tough questions about why hasn't it been moved? I don't understand. You have a law. Why hasn't it been moved? And the answers were not good answers, and he grilled the guy because they weren't really good answers. Well, we think, well, what's the hard evidence? What's this? What's that? And it was basically when he concluded that hearing, less than a few weeks later, it was in November, in the beginning of December, is when President Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And coincidentally, I don't think David Friedman knew about those visits and what DeSantis called President Trump at the beginning of the year to say, "Hey, I think this Arnona thing is a simple thing to do, as compared to all kinds of other thoughts." And David Friedman, independently, I believe, came to the same conclusion, and then ultimately the embassy was moved to the Arnona location.
Yeah, I know a story that David probably told you, and I've heard him tell a number of times, is how President Trump told him, David, the State Department, they're telling me this is going to cost like $3 billion and take like 6 years. So and David goes, Mr. President, I can get it done for you in 3 months and 500,000 or whatever, half a billion, whatever, like whatever the number was. And basically President Trump said, okay, David, do it.
I'll tell you another, it's almost uncanny. It's almost freaky, this coincidence. So it's no coincidence. As you know, Harry Truman had a business partner when they were in the haberdashery business. And while the business failed and went bankrupt, Harry Truman personally did not go bankrupt. And so the creditors were hounding him even when he was president. So that Jewish business partner would visit Harry because he became a traveling salesman in the White House every so often, and he'd bring a satchel of cash along, and he'd give it to his erstwhile partner to pay off the creditors. So even though he was not responsible, and Harry, unfortunately, because he couldn't go bankrupt, was, and that's why they kept hounding him, he continued to fund him in order to pay off those debts. Now, David Friedman was President Trump's bankruptcy lawyer.
Right.
And so that connection, and just like in Truman's case, it was David Friedman who kept President Trump out of problems.
Right. And it was his, correct me if I'm wrong, the story goes that it was Harry Truman's business partner who
Yes.
was courted by the Jewish leaders of the world at the time, or America. I'm from Israel. Go to President Truman and ask him to recognize Israel. And because Harry Truman's staff was not letting anyone meet him at the time
Yep.
from the Jewish Zionist community to push for that. And from what I understood, it's because he finally agreed to take advantage of his friendship with President Truman, and President Truman actually said it. I don't remember what his name was because I hope you're not here to talk to me about recognizing the Jewish state of Israel. And he said, "Yes, I am, Harry. Do it," or something like that. And it's because of that that Harry ended up doing it. So the
Yeah, he met.
parallels between that story and the story of Trump and David Friedman is mind blowing.
Yes. Isn't that amazing? I was always on the other side of Donald Trump when he was in business. In fact, his first major deal, which became the Grand Hyatt Hotel, I was working for the City Corporation Council then, and I was the guy on the other side. I must have been at the time 26. I think he was like 33 or something like that. We worked day and night. He used to come around in the middle of the night, pat everyone on the back and say, "Good job." And I'd look at him and I'd say, "Donald, I'm on the other side." He goes, "Never mind, you're getting the deal done." He had a certain charm about him, and it was an experience. And I got to tell you, in a very rough business, in the real estate business is not simple. Really tough guys. He was among the group that people continued to do business with because he always left some crumbs on the table, as opposed to other guys who they weren't happy until they had a bloody show, in essence, and they took everything. The other guy had to suffer almost in order to make the deal. He wanted people to have something. I mean, he was a tough guy, no question about it, but
Really,
that was
because
a
the
different
impression
class.
is totally different. The impression is that he's an all or nothing guy and I win and you lose. And you're trying to say like, no, in reality it wasn't that way at all. Like
No,
he's an I win, but he wants people to walk away from the table with something so they don't feel like losers.
right.
That's totally
Interesting, right?
different from the impression given.
Now, he also had a very interesting way about him. He knew when to fight and not. So, for example, when I represented a bunch of the lenders when that gambling hotel in Atlantic City went bankrupt, and he came into the room, took the key, a set of keys, put them on the table. He goes, "It's yours, guys. Now, if you want me to continue to run it and get you your money or as much as I can, well, then let's make a deal. But if not, here it is. Goodbye, good luck." Which explains why lenders continued to do business with them.
Right.
Because other guys, it was scorched earth. I mean, I remember one guy, he actually, in the middle of the night, brought trucks with asbestos, dumped it in the basement, and he goes, "Make my days, lenders. Go ahead. You want it, you got it." So there were real tough guys in the real estate business. He was part of the better group of real estate developers because even though he's very tough, because the business is a very tough business, as we talked, he always wanted to leave something on the table. It wasn't scorched earth.
So let me ask you this, Leonard. Since I didn't know you had this personal past working with President Trump, but even though here we're talking about you being an author to the book, of dealing with the miraculous passing of the law that led to the U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital and the moving of the embassy. What is your insight into the moves of President Trump today vis-a-vis Israel and taking care of Gaza and taking care of the nuclear problem of Iran? Because based on a lot of headlines, there are people who are worried, thinking that no, Trump's not gonna, he's just going after the diplomatic deal and Israel's gonna get screwed, and we shouldn't trust him. I'd love to hear your 2 cents. I mean, if you have what to say, you could say, Avi, I have nothing to say. But just based on your own personal business background, love to hear what you have to say.
My experience with him is that don't believe the headlines, don't believe all these people who claim to know. He likes to make a deal. There's no question. Now, if there's no deal to be made, he also knows how to walk away. And I've seen him do that. And then I've seen people come back and no harm, no foul. He would start negotiating with them. In fact, I'd advise some people, go call him. If you have something to offer, call him because you never know. Now, and in many cases, a deal was structured, maybe not exactly the way they wanted it, but good enough in order to make a deal. So he is a deal maker. He's not a fool by any stretch of the imagination. So while his sheet as to what he wants to get done may be somewhat different than another sheet, and he comes from the school of if I get what I want, then I'll leave some crumbs on the table. So that may be acceptable to him. It may not necessarily be acceptable to others because what's important to him may not be the be all and end all. There may be some of those crumbs that are very important, as we're seeing now with some of the negotiations. But he does listen and he is willing to change his mind. He's not an all or nothing kind of guy. So you can negotiate. He negotiates, you can negotiate back, and he does want to make a deal. If he doesn't get those baseline items that are on his sheet, he's prepared to walk away. Now, I used to talk to him directly in those days. So when I thought I was getting BS from some of the people, I just pick up the phone. And what was uncanny to me at the time was he'd just pick up the phone. He
Hmm.
goes, "Oh, Len, okay, what do you want?" And you'd have a discussion with him, which is why I told clients, call him, go talk to him directly, because he's willing to listen and willing to talk.
Which again
Now,
goes totally against the public perception of him today, thinking like you only have 3 seconds of his attention and he already is set in his ways and he's not willing to listen, etc., etc., etc. So you're saying no, totally different,
yes, oh, that's my experience. My experience was you
right?
could sit, you could talk. He engaged, and he had a charm about him. In fact, I'll tell you an important thing that shows some of his personality. When he moved the embassy, I went around saying we got to write thank you letters because
Hmm.
he does appreciate that.
Right.
And a lot of the people were giving me guff. I said, well, we come from a tradition. You're thankful for the government because, but for the government, I said, remember the rules, but for the government, a big guy would beat up a small guy. He would eat him up alive. I mean, come on. He did something very good and we should thank him. So I made some progress. But then I said, you know what? My experience with him is he loves kids, loves them. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go to the schools and I'm going to ask the kids to write letters. And I started with my own grandchildren. And it was really fun. I took them out for coffee and we brainstormed. And they wrote personal letters and they got letters back because President Trump treasures those things, especially they were handwritten letters. And so it was amazing. In Teaneck here, one of the Facebook groups of parents in one of the high schools objected. And they said, how could the principal tell them to do letters? The principal answered them correctly. I didn't ask him to do letters. I set aside time and said, if you want to do a letter, it would be nice to thank President Trump for the good he did. So there's nothing wrong with that. And I stand by my decision and I give him a lot of credit. And this is not politics. I mean, you could be Democrat, Republican, you could be
Right,
Christian, Jewish. This was an important thing to be done.
right.
And as we see, it really was a good thing to do and has helped a lot. So it's an example of him. He does like kids, though. He treasures them. And you can see it in his own relationship with his kids and his grandchildren.
Yes, who are Jewish. He has more Jewish grandchildren than many Jews in America today who have grandchildren, which is
Now, one of
very
the things I did in the book, because I wanted to show that the statement, because it's just and right, was correct, was go back in history and talk about Yerushalayim historically, and especially the legal history, because this question has been raised a number of times. Of course, everyone refers to the first Rashi in Bereshis as to why do we have the whole book of Genesis? We ought to start in the book of Exodus with the
right.
first commandment. Chodesh, this is should be your first month, which ushers in Passover. So it's a great Rashi, but there are other Parshanim, commentators, that also discuss the question, and one of them is the Chizkuni. So a little bit later than Rashi. Rashi was 11th century, Chizkuni was 13th century,
But before
and
you go to the Chizkuni, I just want to, because you touched upon it, I just want to give it to people who are not familiar. Rashi specifically says in this beginning of the Bible of Genesis of Breshit, he goes straight out. The nations of the world are going to call Jews robbers and robbing this land. And no, God created this land and he gave it to the Jewish people. That's Rashi right there, hundreds of years ago, saying exactly what's happening. So, yes, now go to the Chizkuni, Leonard.
Chizkuni says, and by the way, the Canaanites are not the original inhabitants. They were trying to steal it, the land of Israel, even when Abraham first came there, because when it says Abraham came to Israel, it says the Canaanites, us, were then in the land.
Right.
And Chizkuni says, what do you mean then? By the way, Rashi also on that verse says it's because they were trying to rob it even then. So what came to mind is, look, my tradition is as a real estate finance lawyer, for that, a real estate lawyer. Um, Genesis is like a title record. In fact, it is the oldest title record, written record in existence. The only thing close is from the 13th century in Scotland. That was the first written register of title. So here we have a document, and look, we believe it comes from God, but whether you believe it comes from God or not, it's old. It has great provenance. We have pieces of it that go back well over 2,000 years, many years older than that. The Septuagint, the Greek translation, was done over 2,000 years ago. It's the same document. It's entitled to respect as a very old document, the oldest written record of title in existence. So now let's look at it as a title report, because it really is. And I hark back to now a title legend. It's really cute. When I was a young real estate lawyer, my mentor at the time presented me with a copy of this letter. Now, whether the letter is real or not, it's in the tradition of real estate law. And that is in the original FHA mortgage insurance program. So this was the federal program that insured mortgages so that people who otherwise wouldn't qualify could get qualified because the government guaranteed the loan. So now it's in Louisiana, and in Louisiana, they didn't have title insurance. You had to do an opinion of title. So the lawyer handling the matter sends the FHA administrator a letter in which he traces back abstract title for about 170 years to 1803. 1803, you remember, is when the Louisiana Purchase occurred.
Okay.
And he gets back a letter saying, that's very good what you did. Nice job. But I wanted from the very beginning who was the original owner of that piece of property. So you got to do better. So now he writes it's caustic, the letter, therefore it's funny. Very caustic letter. He goes, that's very interesting. Well, I've traced it back to 1803, and as everyone knows, that was when the Louisiana Purchase occurred. The government of the United States bought the entire area of Louisiana and more from the French government, and the French government acquired it by right of conquest from the Spanish government. And the Spanish government, he goes, acquired it by right of discovery. Now, this was not simple. Remember, it was Columbus who was coming, and he did it under the authorization of Queen Isabella, who didn't just authorize him, she called the Pope. And the Pope is the vicar of God in the Catholic religion. And so he was speaking for God. And as we know, God created the world, he goes, and Louisiana is part of the world. So that means the original holder of title is God, and this is how we got here. So thinking back to that, if you look at uh, Genesis, it really is a discussion of not just genealogy in the abstract, but it shows there are actual discussions in the verses, if you look at it like a real estate lawyer, of the uh, the survey description. For example, it talks about Canaan being the child of Ham. So you start with the proposition that Noah, after the flood, divided up the entire world among Shem, Japhet, and Ham. Japhet, it's very cute. The Torah Orach says he liked to travel, so he went around the whole world, and he got a lot of islands and a lot of stuff. He goes, Ham and Shem, they were more like homebodies, and so they stayed in the Middle East area for the most part. And Canaan, it says, their property was the approaches to Sodom and Amorah, the approaches to Gaza, and the approaches to Sidon. So excluded is all of Eretz Yisrael. Shem, on the other hand, got Eretz Yisrael, and that's why we have Malki Tzedek Melech Shalom. Malki Tzedek, according to the Gemara, is Shem. Whether he's Shem or a descendant of Shem, same thing for these purposes. And Abram is also a descendant of Shem, and he inherited the land, which is why when the Torah talks about the land of Israel, it talks about it as Nachala, inheritance, Achuza, inheritance. The words are always words of inheritance because it's Abram inherited from Shem.
Right.
And now Abram, during his lifetime, took care. He didn't trust a will or an executor. He gave everything he had, including Eretz Yisrael, to Isaac. And Isaac gave it, again, the Torah says, to Yaakov. When it comes to Yaakov, it's really cool because it says Yaakov had a chevel. A chevel is a measuring rope. So when he did his walkthrough, because remember, Abraham did a walkthrough, which is how you exercise dominion and control. He walked the survey. Isaac did. Fascinating. Isaac, the Radak asks, why did Isaac, he just uncovered the wells in Gaza. Why did he leave and go to Beersheba? So the Radak says, well, even though he exercised dominion and control and preserved it as an inheritance, we wouldn't get full sovereignty until the time of Mashiach. So you figured, okay, I'm out of here. I'm going to Beersheba. So then he gives it to Yaakov, and Yaakov has this chevel. A chevel is a measuring rope that does the metes and bounds description of the property. So he's actually measuring it. Yeah, this is mine. All right, that, okay, this is mine. And he also exercised dominion control. And of course, then he gives it to his children. So when the Gemara discusses this, when the Medrash discusses it, the promise that's made to Avram is to give back, in a sense, the land of Israel because it was being stolen by the Canaanites, who were the children of Ham. Now, interestingly, also, um, we're from Shem, including all the Shvatim, because Lavan was the father of the two half sisters that became the maidservants. So all four daughters were from Lavan. And as we know, Yehuda married Tamar. Tamar is called a Canaanite, but not a Canaani, but it doesn't mean a Canaanite. A Canaani there means a merchant, a sales, a dealer and stuff. And her father was a descendant of Shem. So Judah marries Tamar, and we're from, in all likelihood, Yehuda. So we're Shem on all sides. And Yishmael can't make that same argument because his mom came from Mitzrayim, which was a descendant of Ham. So he's only on one side. And it's interesting that what Abram gave Yishmael were gifts. So now we have in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, which is also in the Yerushalmi and in the Medrash and the Megillas Tanis, it's a description of Gibeah in the time of Alexander. What happened is all of these nations made the claim that Israel was theirs. So the Girgashites that Yeshua made a deal with, they left Israel and they went to Africa. They're called from Africae in the Gemara. And they were hanging out probably in North Africa. So now when Alexander comes in, he's sitting in what will become Alexandria in Egypt. They come in and say, we want to make a court case. We want Israel back. So Gebiah comes to Chazal and he says, look, guys, if you go there and argue this case and lose, it's lost. He goes, if you send Gebiah, I call him the country lawyer, you can say, that was Gebiah. We want to send the real lawyer. So there's no downside if Gebiah goes, and he goes, and I can argue this case. So he comes there. He's up against world-class law firms. And after they present their evidence, he gets to cross-examine them in front of Alexander, the judge. And he says to him, where are you basing this all on? He goes, well, it's in the Bible. He goes, oh, interesting. So the basis of your claim is the Bible, right? Yes. He goes, okay. The Bible says it belongs to Abram, Isaac, and Jacob. And we're the children of Jacob. Remember, Jacob's other name was Israel, and we're the children of Israel. So you lose, I win. And he goes, by the way, I got a counterclaim I want to assert. So Alexander says, what's your counterclaim? He goes, you know what? Under that peace deal in Joshua, when they left, he goes, they were supposed to perform services. There was a price to peace, and they never performed those services. So they owe me back for the labor I had to spend. So Alexander gives them 3 days to come back. In the meantime, they run away, judgment in favor of Israel. Then the Plishtim come. And the Plishtim says, come on, we conquered this land. And same routine with the cross-examination. And he says, come on, you tried to steal it. In fact, Plishtim means you were trying to conquer it. So reality is we beat your rear end and with Saul and then David, and you're out and we're in. It's right there in black and white. Alexander, judgment in favor of Israel. Then the Ishmaelites come and the Bnei Keturah, and they say, come on, it's ours. We were children. In fact, they assert they were the Bchor, and therefore they're entitled to a double portion. So they're entitled to be there and to share it. And Gebiah goes through the whole routine. He goes, come on, it says he gave it all to Isaac, and you got some presents. La-di-da with the presents and leave us alone. Alexander, judgment in favor of Israel. It's amazing. Same arguments keep being made, and it was disposed of even in Alexander's time. And then came World War I and the breakup of the Ottoman Empire after the war. 1919 at the peace conference, where all the Allied powers were, and the representative of the Central Powers, they broke up, as we talked about earlier, parts of Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and also the Ottoman Empire. They So they recreated Poland. They made Romania, Yugoslavia. I mean, all these countries were
Right.
created out of the empires. That was 1919. Now they adjourn to San Remo in 1920, and they hear claims regarding the Ottoman Empire. Now it's fascinating. A bunch of people met at the Paris Peace Conference, including Emir Faisal. That's where he had the exchange of correspondence with Weizmann, but he also had letters with Felix Frankfurter, who eventually became a Supreme Court judge, all promising, I agree with you, except when push came to shove, if you look at the minutes of the actual hearing that was held in San Remo, he says, let's cover that later. We'll push that to the side. That's something between the parties. I want Saudi Arabia, and let me present my case. So he didn't really do what he promised to do. The Syrian delegation said, come on, we were the place that administered this area in the Ottoman Empire. It was, what was it? It was a nothing little place, and we're the big shots, and we should get it. And the Jews presented their case. So now think about what you have there. You have the representatives of the United States, Great Britain, France, Italy, Japan, all sitting there, and they're listening to all the presentations and claims being made. And they say in no uncertain terms in the San Remo resolution that this belongs to the Jewish people and they should reconstitute their state there. And they're going to make a mandate, which eventually the League of Nations does.
Yep.
And the provisions are very important because, first of all, for the first time in modern history, they called this area that they labeled Palestine a country. So they're giving us the country, not just some land. And they define the borders and their maps that show the borders. Now, originally included Transjordan, but there was some wiggle room for Great Britain to lop that off. It was supposed to do it with the approval of the League of Nations. They didn't get League of Nations approval. They did it anyway. But there was a built-in thing for Transjordan. But from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, including Gaza, Yerushalayim, Judea and Samaria, all of that was in there awarded to the Jewish people. Now, it also had some other unique provisions. It said the mandatory administration shall pass a nationality law that gives citizenship to Jews from anywhere in the world who come back and take up permanent residence in Israel. No other party gets that. In fact, the other parties are you have to protect their civil and religious rights, no political rights. It's supposed to be the Jewish state of Israel, and the Jewish state of Israel, as it does, is in fact the only one that does, respects the religious and civil rights of non-Jews as well. And so all of that is built in there. League of Nations then unanimously approves it. The United States is not a party. And so,
Right.
because they didn't join the League of Nations.
Right.
So what happens is the United States wants in and Britain wants them in. So they enter into the Anglo-American Convention, we would call it treaty, which is approved by the Senate and therefore constitutes under the Constitution the supreme law of the United States of America that incorporates all of the provisions of the League of Nations ratification of the San Remo Declaration. So all of that is embodied in American law. It's interesting. One of the feedbacks I got from some of the staff of Senator Kyle was, I wish we would have known that, because the
Really.
reality is the Embassy Act, if they based it on the Anglo-American Convention, which is the San Remo Declaration as unanimously ratified by the League of Nations, well, that would mean that it is presidential recognition because Calvin Coolidge recognized this all, including that this is the reconstituted national home of the Jews. And in effect, it's the Jews are the indigenous people of Eretz Yisrael.
Right.
Fact. That's it. So now it would have given them less problems in terms of presidential recognition. Now, it's fascinating also, at the beginning of the war, when the British passed the white paper, it didn't go unnoticed. In fact, the majority of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Representatives wrote a letter to the Secretary of State saying, how dare they do this without our consent? We have a nationality law. Jews are supposed to be allowed to return to Israel, and they're violating our treaty. We want you to tell them they can't do that. We're not consenting, and we want them to stop, and we want them to keep letting Jews move in like they're supposed to. Roosevelt actually said something too late in 1944, but he said it was a violation of the treaty. So you have presidents on record from Wilson all the way to Roosevelt, and the cutest is Theodore Roosevelt. Teddy wasn't president at the time. In 1918, he writes a private letter in which he says, come on, this is the right thing to do. The Jews are supposed to be in charge here, and their land should be built around Jerusalem.
He wrote that as a private letter to whom?
To somebody, I have a copy.
Wow,
Uh,
that's
yeah,
fascinating.
it is.
Psh,
So there was a lot of recognition, and rightfully so. So that was a prelude to the Jerusalem Embassy Act, which in its text said Jerusalem should remain undivided.
right, which is why I remind people in every single Pulse of Israel episode that and again, this studio is right here in the indivisible capital of Jerusalem since King David's time. And people say,
Mhm.
it's interesting because people say, Avi, what are you talking about? It was divided. That's not true. I'm like, "Yeah, the division was not natural, and it was because of war and an unnatural state that the international community allowed that state to be in, that Jordan occupied the old city of Jerusalem and split Jerusalem. But the fact that we liberated in 1967 is putting it back into its natural state. It was always one city. It was because people today think, oh my God, there's East Jerusalem, there's West Jerusalem. No, there's one Jerusalem. Historically, there's always been one indivisible Jerusalem. Those 19 years of a Jordanian occupation do not make it a divided Jerusalem historically. Historically, it was one indivisible capital since King David's time. Hence, it's so important to remind people about these basic facts and getting all of this history from you right now. Some of this that I didn't even know, especially those letters following the San Remo Accords, etc. It's fascinating.
You know, there is a political theology that's taken hold. Uh, when the second Caliph Omar conquered Israel from the Byzantines. The Byzantines were notorious in many ways. Among them was they actually believed they replaced us. So when you look at what it was at the time, they made the entire Temple Mount into a garbage dump with excrement,
What
and
year is
they
this?
built the
Give
church.
people perspective. What year are you talking about, Leonard?
We're talking about now around the third century. Okay, they conquered it before, but the Byzantines became, and because it was Rome. So when the Byzantine Empire, because that was moved the capital from Rome to what is Constantinople, then called Byzantine. So you have Constantine the Great, and then there was a shift back with the successor, but then it came again. But they had a philosophy. In fact, at the Council of Nicaea, so this is now in the fourth century, they basically want to excise anybody in Christianity who didn't believe as they did that they were the cat's meow, the Jews were nothing, and they were the successors to the Jews, and they were the ones who espoused the Trinity, for example. And remember, there was Bishop Arius and the Arians who said, no way, there's one God. The Muslims, of course, believe one God. All right, the Rambam would probably say it's a problem. Tosfos, though, would probably say 3 equals 1. There's some room, but it's just talk. But be that as it may, the Byzantines, though, had a political theology, which is They took over. They're God's chosen people now. The chosen people are out, which is inconsistent, by the way, with the uh, the New Testament, which doesn't say that. In fact, in Romans, it says the opposite. It says they continue also to be chosen, and it rejects that concept. Be that as it may, the Byzantines were very hot into it because you know what? They had a very diverse empire, and it was the whole Middle East. There were all kinds of different belief systems, and so they wanted to demand loyalty by saying you had to believe what they did, and anybody who had a different point of view, they wanted to get rid of. So now you have Omar, who's late to converting to Islam, very cosmopolitan individual from the Byzantine Empire, very literate, and he becomes the second caliph. And he's the guy who, with lesser numbers, beats a bigger Byzantine army in all places, Megiddo. And he takes over Jerusalem. Now, the Byzantines had barred Jews from living in Jerusalem at the time. They could live elsewhere in Eretz Israel, but not in Jerusalem. So he insisted that the Jews be allowed to come back to Jerusalem. In fact, in his army, he had a number of Jews. Now, this is a really cute story. This is Al-Tabari. Al-Tabari is a ninth century Muslim historian. He says that in Omar's army was a gentleman by the name of Kab. Kab was a convert to Islam. He had previously been from Yemen and a rabbi. So Kab is a pretty knowledgeable guy, and he's part of the staff of the army, and Omar would rely on him. As I said, there were many Jews, especially from the Persian Empire, who were part of his army.
Okay.
So now he says to Kab, I want to see this holy place where your temple stood. Show me where it is, Kab. You must know. So Kab brings him up to the Temple Mount. And what they see is a garbage mound. He goes, so where did your temple stand? So Kab starts, according to El Tabari, and it's mirrored in another later theologian's report, starts doing measurements. And he's basically looking at the Mishnah and figuring, oh, okay, here, this lamp, okay, here it is. He goes, come on, Kab, start digging. So now he starts digging, and they uncover the Eben Shetiyah.
Foundation
In
stone.
Arabic, in English, foundation stone, in Arabic, al-Sakra, which is why the dome is called Kubat al-Sakra, the dome of the foundation stone, mistranslated as dome of the rock. Rock would be Hijar, not Sakra. So it's meant to be what it is. And we'll get into why in a moment when I talk about Ibn Taymiyyah's view from the
Right, but
13th
the
century.
important thing is that the name given to it reflects the true purpose of why it was built in order to protect the foundation stone of the temple so that the Jews can one day rebuild our temple.
In this book, I make a slight variation on that as a suggestion because having studied a little bit about Omar, this guy was some sharp guy. So now, in fact, there actually is a medrash called Sitra, the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai from about the 9th century that talks about the second caliph and what happened. Okay, so now, um, and that he would actually clean up the Temple Mount and he would create what it's called the Hishtachavaya. There are only two times that term is used in all of our literature, in that Medrash and in the Medrash Rabbah when it discusses Avram going up in the Akedah. So now um, he looks at Kab. He goes, where should we put a mosque? So Kab says, let's build it north of this site. So Omar says, Kab, I know that trick. Okay, let me explain something. Because I'm looking at your feet. I see you took off your shoes. So you're still Jewish. I know that. So we're not praying towards the Jewish place. We pray towards Mecca, he goes. So I'm going to put it way south.
Uh-huh.
Now, there was a monastery there and a hospital, and he took that site over. He didn't actually build the permanent Al-Aqsa or the dome. He laid it out, and it was later built by his successor's son. So three caliphs down build it. And the Al-Aqsa Mosque, what they call the Al-Aqsa, it's not the original Aqsa, but they call the Al-Aqsa, is built outside of the precincts of the temple on the Herodian platform that was the extension of the Temple Mount. The Dome of the Rock, which is not a mosque, as we know, in fact,
Right.
it's basically just a hall that goes around the Evan Shasia so that you can check it out. In fact, when you see him praying, they're always outdoors because there's no place to pray indoors there. It's just a hallway basically around. So he built it as a monument. So when you look at the verses on it, it doesn't talk about, as it says in very few hadiths, about the night journey, because
Right.
the night journey is not in the Quran. It's not in most of the hadiths. Uh, Whether it happened, it didn't happen, it's spiritual, it's a dream, it doesn't matter. The reality is, it's unlikely. In fact, one of the footnotes in my book, yeah, I talk about how the fact that it was a garbage dump with excrement. How could you have to clean your feet? What, you're going to stand in the dirt? It doesn't work in Islam. So reality is, uh,
One of the things I tell people when I go up to the Temple Mount, whether I'm hosting them on a visit up or it's a video, I say, everyone, look around. Does this look as cleanly as Mecca or Medina, which is immaculate? Like,
right.
don't you think if the Temple Mount was a holy place to the Muslims, it would be as immaculately clean as Mecca and Medina? It's a garbage dump. It's not as bad as you're describing right now, but they treat their areas, except for where they actually sit and pray, as the rest of the Temple Mount is a garbage dump where they actually
Yep.
throw garbage and rocks everywhere. It's not a holy place if they really consider it holy.
In fact, Ibn Taymiyyah, so now we're talking 13th century theologian. By the way, the antecedent to the Salafis and a lot of what became the modern views that animate the Muslim Brotherhood, etc. He actually said, in no uncertain terms, this is not holy to us. He goes, this is for the Jews. He goes, our place is Mecca.
Do you have source material for that? I'd love that
Yes, it's
source.
all in the book.
Oh wow, love if you could send me that source. That's
So
amazing.
he actually calls this Kubla Manchuka, the strange direction, because it has nothing to do with them. So he basically says, in fact, he actually uses the term. He goes, "This is like Shabbos. That's for them. They have Friday." He goes, "They have Mecca. They have Friday. Don't mix me up with these things." He goes, "Men of knowledge and the compatriots to Muhammad all knew this is not for them. This is a Jewish place." So think about now what verses are on the dome. As you know, they don't put paintings and stuff like that because that's idol worship. So they have stylized verses that are done up prettily on the dome. And what are they about? There's only one God, there's no Trinity, there's no this. Come on. It's the verses of the Quran that establish the belief in one God as opposed to the Byzantine beliefs in the Trinity, etc. So it's almost the equivalent, this is my suggestion, of a neon sign in our times flashing down at the guys at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is what we believe. And by the way, this is the Jewish place. And they're not gone. They're part of our group now. And be careful because we're winning. And in the end, they do, of course, and it becomes the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
Now, in the Treaty of Sèvres, they specifically incorporate. So now in 1920, when the Ottoman Empire signs the peace treaty, they adopt, in reality, the San Remo Declaration. They phrase it similarly, not exactly the same as the original declaration, the Balfour Declaration, but they recognize that this is the homeland of the Jews. So that's in the Sèvres. Now, it's fascinating. Some of them argue, well, that was the Ottoman Empire, we're Turkey. Okay, in the Treaty of Lausanne, they agree in no uncertain terms in Article 95, 96, that it's not theirs. They gave it up. It's whatever the league does. It's not their business. So now in the League of Nations ratification of the San Remo Declaration, in that same document, they recognize Mesopotamia, which is Iraq. They recognize Syria. They recognize Saudi Arabia. So when people talk about this, if you deny the validity from a legal point of view under international law of these really bedrock documents in international law, you're basically denying the existence of all these states that were created out of the Ottoman Empire. So whether
Right.
you adopt uh, Eugene's concept and Natasha of uti possidetis juris, which is whatever they have, they gave up. Or I would argue, go back to the original document and the maps that created it. Bottom line is, under international law, it's ours. We have a right to be there. We're the indigenous people recognized. And they weighed all the claims and all the evidence, and they came to a reasoned conclusion that it's ours because it's just and right.
That is fascinating, Leonard. Now, what is your final reason of why people must go online in order to purchase this book of yours?
Well, there are a lot of other things in there too. We take up a lot of the issues that have been raised and answer them, from Gaza and what is the meaning of occupation legally, cases. Fascinating case I actually describe on this point also in Yerushalayim, which it's amazing to me. All right, I had to read it in the original French, so I can't say everyone can just go and read it, but you could probably use Google Translate today. But there's a Court of Appeals case in Versailles on, of all topics, the light rail, because Alstom, that provided the equipment for the train, was sued
You're talking
by
about the light rail
PLO.
of Jerusalem today?
Yes. So
Okay.
Mahmoud Abbas, as a hitter in the PLO at the time, brings a lawsuit in France saying Alstom cannot provide the light rail because it violates international law, the Geneva Convention, this and that. It's an occupation. All those claims, everything that they throw around.
He went
By the
to a
way,
French court to get the French justice system to forbid a French company from providing whatever building because they were involved in building the Jerusalem light rail. Wow.
correct. Okay. The court, I got to tell you, in the English translation, it's funny. In the original French, it's hilarious because they look at these guys. This is the Court of Appeals now. We're talking about a high court in Versailles. And it says things like, just because you say it's so, I mean, the evidence doesn't support what you're
No
saying.
way. A French
Yes,
court of appeals said that?
yes, yes. And
What
it
year are
goes
we
on and
talking
on.
about? Is this beginning of the 2000s? I don't even know when.
2013. No one,
2013, a French court said you might say it's so that it doesn't belong to the Jews. Wow.
in fact, it says no occupation. What are you talking about? Israel is the sovereign authority there. It has an absolute right to do it. It says all these wonderful things.
Oh
It
my
knocks
God.
out,
If
in
this is
fact,
just so, this is so like apropos because right now the French prime minister is saying, forcing us to create a two-state solution, occupiers. And here there's documentation from a French court saying that there's no occupation and the Jewish people are
right,
sovereign in their
we're
homeland.
sovereign. We're the sovereign authority there.
Oh
And
my God. If you could send me a link to that, that would be
sure,
amazing.
sure. So it's beautiful. By the way, again, some of the language they said, you think this is a bombing? Because they say that in order to do the light rail, you had to rip up the streets. So they said that's demolition of civil property and this and that under the Geneva Convention. So the court goes, I think they were referring to bombings. He goes, this doesn't seem to fit that criteria. I mean, they go through it item by item and knock it out because, as we
Wow.
know, it has no reality. And it's not the law.
Right.
Occupation.
They've been brilliant in harnessing the language of the law to brainwash billions of people in the world to think that they have a case to stand on in the legal sense, even though there is all zero. It's all a bunch of lies and misinformation, but people are led to believe it. And it's
Now
here
I'll
you have
send
a
you
French
something
court.
that
Wow.
uh, Eugene Kantorovich, who I mentioned before, mentioned that there are UN documents that support the fact that the so-called occupation, that's me adding a little footnote, ended in 1994. Now, I got to tell you, it took me weeks because it's not indexed. You can't just search for it. I had to go document by document because I knew what I was looking for. So the two documents I found that actually say this is signed by the PA.
That's the Palestinian
One
Authority.
was one was to get money to redo their real estate tax system. The other was to get Yericho designated as a World Heritage Site.
Right.
Now, in order to be able to apply for these things, you have to say you're in control. Otherwise, who are you to ask?
Right.
Okay, so in both documents, they say that the so-called occupation was 1967 to 1994, and then begins the era of the PA. So black and white, no occupation. Now, I would say there was never an occupation. In fact, I
Right.
would say that they were Jordanian citizens, and as Jordanian citizens, whatever rights they may have had, which we would argue were none because it was an illegal war and occupation, were given up. When Jordan made peace, the international border was the Jordan River, which means they can complain to Jordan. In fact, they would have moved to Jordan, but it's ours. And whether you argue it was always ours the way we do, or you argue whatever rights Jordan gave up anyway, and as a citizen, those were your rights. By the way, they got the right in those documents. It's called the Jericho Declaration of 1949 to have half approximately of the Jordanian parliament. Now, Jordan
What
has
do you
been
mean? What do you
quiet.
mean have half of the Jordanian parliament? What's that referring to?
The people who argue they're the Palestinians since 64 were Jordanian citizens at the time.
Right.
And under the agreement that was called the Jericho Declaration, they got the right to elect approximately half of the representatives in the Jordanian parliament. So they were full citizens. And by the way, there's another thing I found, which I got to tell you, it turns my stomach, but it's reality. The State Department actually secretly recognized Jordan's taking over of not Jerusalem, but of Judea and Samaria, which
Right.
is so shocking. And I found the document, and I give some credit to Jordan because it says if you tell anybody, we'll deny it. And they never told anybody. So
Wow.
the world always thought it was Great Britain alone, maybe Pakistan or Indonesia, but there's no real document. But the State Department, in that internal memo, acknowledged they told them secretly they recognize it. So now you have citizenship, recognition, and a peace treaty where Jordan gives it up. So to anybody's argument, it's whatever rights you may have had are gone. There's no reservation for the so-called Palestinians. In fact, as you know, by that time, Hussein was on the outs because of Black September.
Right.
But it's an example of when you talk law, which is why I love that Court of Appeals case in Versailles in France, because they say we're talking law here and facts, not baloney.
Right. Right.
So we take up a bunch of these kind of things in the book as well. And so it's a one place you can go to learn the history of Israel, especially the legal history, and why it's just and right that it's a Jewish state. And all these arguments have been made and lost time and time again. And as a matter of international law, as a matter of law, as a matter of US law, this belongs to the Jewish people.
Leonard, thank you so much. There'll be a link below, and otherwise, everyone just Google Justin Wright, Leonard Grunstein to be able to find the link on Amazon or wherever else it is that you can order online. Fascinating read, fascinating information, so important. And yeah, I'm a big believer in trying to motivate people to strengthen their understanding of the truth and the morality of the right of the Jewish people in our ancestral biblical homeland. Because it's only when we, on our own, and here I'm talking to Jews, stand up for our own rights and have the self-respect for ourselves and our own identity and our own rights, only then will we be able to receive respect from anyone else. But so long as we are the first ones to give up on our rights, on our homeland, no one else will respect us, and no one else will stand up for our justice if we're not going to stand up for it ourselves. So your book seems to be a very, very important addition to assist people in getting to that place, to have that level of confidence historically and even with the legal information so that they can stand up proudly and comfortably as well. So thank you so much for that addition, Leonard.
Thank you.
Until next time, because it looks like there's plenty that we can still talk about regarding Israel, the Jewish people. So I look forward to having future talks with you, Leonard. And in the meantime, shalom, and thank you everyone for watching. If you are not yet a subscriber to our daily, belief-based, inspiring, politically incorrect, truthful videos about Israel, the Jewish people, and the freedom-loving world, what are you waiting for? Go to pulsevisual.com and click to subscribe today. And yes, we are a donor-based operation. We need your donations for support in order to make these videos and get our videos seen and do all the work we do. So every once in a while, whether a large donation or a small donation, just go to pulsevisual.com and click on the donate button. Shalom, everyone, and thanks for watching.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.